A young mother was found dead in her bedroom. Since the first days of investigation, detectives have faced almost a complete lack of evidence, but soon this case took a rather unexpected turn. As a result, they learned shocking details that changed the course of the case and revealed the truth. Friends, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like. It's very important to me. Young was born on February 17, 1977, in the small American city of Seville, New York. From an early age, she was characterized by perseverance and determination. She set herself ambitious goals and made every effort to achieve them. In high school, Michelle studied well and was captain of the cheerleading team. She also chose a career path quite early for herself. She was planning on becoming a tax lawyer. To obtain an appropriate education, Michelle enrolled at the University of North Carolina in Raleigh. She joined the local cheerleading team there, but later decided to leave and focus on her studies. 4 years later, she received her master's degree, and soon after, she joined a local accounting company. Although Michelle was just beginning her career, her position meant a good start. She rented an apartment in a good neighborhood and spent most of her time moving up the ladder. In February 2001, while celebrating her 24th birthday with friends, she met a man named Jason. He was a few years older and graduated from the same university as her. The couple quickly found common ground, and soon they began dating. Jason worked as a sales agent for a major power tool company. He lived in another town, and at the time of their acquaintance was at Raleigh for work. After meeting Michelle, he began to travel there more often, and the rest of the time the couple communicated by phone. Later, he finally moved to this city, and after a while they began to live together. 2 years later, she became pregnant, and in August 2003 the couple decided to marry. On March 29, they had a daughter named Cassidy, and the family moved into a large house in a prestigious neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Around the same time, Michelle's sister Meredith moved to Raleigh, and the woman regularly helped the family take care of the child. 2 years later, Michelle became pregnant again, and she and her husband decided to go to Jason's parents to celebrate the news. They lived in a town called Bradward, 400 kilometers from their home. Unfortunately, instead of celebrating, the trip was a tragedy for them. The same day the couple planned to return to Raleigh, Jason and Michelle had a serious accident that caused the pregnancy to end. The family was overwhelmed by the news, but 2 months later, Michelle became pregnant again. After a while, the couple learned that they were going to have a boy, and they looked forward to his birth. On November 2, 2006, Jason moved to another town for work, being a sales agent. He traveled regularly across the country for business meetings and negotiations. This time, he had to go to the town of Clintwood, which was about 490 km away. On that day, Michelle invited her friend Shelley to visit. The women communicated until the evening, after which the friend went home. The next morning, Jason called Meredith's sister-in-law. The man said that before he left for another city, he found designer handbags in the online store with a good discount and wanted to order one for Michelle as a gift for their 3rd anniversary. After her departure, she remembered that he had printed several pages with these bags and left these sheets on the table in his home office. Jason didn't want his wife to see them and find out about the upcoming gift, so he asked her sister to come by their house and pick them up. Meredith agreed and arrived at their house at about 1 p.m. At the time, she had no keys and Michelle was supposed to be at work. However, the woman knew that the door of their garage was broken and could easily be lifted with her hands. She did, but she noticed something strange. Her sister's car was parked there. Meredith entered the house thinking that she had not come to work. Once in the kitchen, she saw Michelle's purse lying on the floor. The woman called her sister by name, but there was no answer. Instead, she heard their dogs barking, which was also strange. When Jason and Michael left the house, they always let the dog out the back. On the 2nd floor, the woman noticed something red on the bedroom floor. As she came closer, she realized with horror that it was a bloodstain, and her sister was there. Michelle was lying face down. Meredith approached her and wanted to turn her over, but immediately felt her sister's body cold. The woman panicked and immediately called 911. At the same time, Cassidy climbed out of the bed next to the body and the girl was only 2 years old and had only seen her aunt and ran to her. Meredith called the police and took her outside, where they waited for the officer. When the woman spoke to the cameraman, he asked if the baby was okay. Meredith examined her and found no visible injuries. The only thing she noticed were small traces of blood all over the room. The woman immediately realized that they were the girl's footprints. The child was immediately handed over to doctors for examination, and the police proceeded to examine the crime scene. They immediately noticed something strange. There were bloody footprints all over the room, but Cassidy's legs were completely clean. In addition, the girl also did not have a single drop of blood. Traces were led to the bathroom. Only in one direction were traces of blood found on the inside of the door, apparently left by the child's hand. Based on this, the detectives have built the most obvious version of what happened. After the murder, the girl was locked in the bathroom for a while, and then someone went in and cleaned her blood. Later, when the police spoke to Michelle's friend, they discovered another interesting fact. Shelley said they put a girl to bed together last night and she was wearing a diaper. However, when the victim's sister came to her house, there was no diaper on the baby. Based on this, the investigators concluded that it was taken by the same person who washed her blood. In the house, the detectives found no signs of forced entry. Detectives found 2 wedding and engagement rings missing from Michelle's hand. At the same time, all other valuables were in place, including cash. This excluded the scenario of robbery. There were 2 small hairs on and near the victim's body that weren't hurt. In addition, 4 DNA samples were found on the jewelry box that did not belong to either Michael or her husband. The house also contained several fingerprints that did not belong to any member of their family. In the bedroom where the victim's body was, Ku-Sue found 2 boot prints, 10 and 12 American sizes. Thanks to the pattern on the soles, they even managed to install a model of the shoes. In addition, detectives noticed blood spatter on the door of the wardrobe with clothes. Except this door was open and the spray pattern was such that it was supposed to be closed when it hit the door. The cops also found something interesting on Jason's computer in his home office. In the history of the browser, in addition to the pages of the store with women's handbags and the search for the route to Clintwood, there were several disturbing search queries. Among them were such phrases as iron anatomy by knockout, the loss of consciousness by head trauma, and similar topics. Medical experts concluded that Michelle had died of a head injury caused by a heavy object. In total, the perpetrator struck her more than 30 times. The woman was 5 months pregnant at the time of her death, and her child also did not survive the attack. It was not possible to determine the exact time of Michael's death. Experts only assumed that it was most likely at 5 or 6 a.m. Such brutality indicated that the perpetrator might have known the victim and strongly disliked her. As usual, the first thing the detectives started looking at was Michelle's husband. They talked to her friends and relatives, who told her many interesting things. Their marriage was very problematic. Jason and Michelle often quarreled over domestic problems. Moreover, the man was initially not happy that his wife became pregnant with her first child. He asked her to terminate the pregnancy, but the woman refused. When Michelle became pregnant after the accident in which she and her husband were in, Jason was again not very happy with this fact. Everything was going so that the couple could divorce in the foreseeable future. Meredith also told the police that Jason's request to retrieve the handbag printouts had initially seemed very strange to her. In addition to the obvious problems in their marriage, more than 3 weeks have passed since the anniversary. However, one obvious fact contradicted the theory of the husband's involvement. At the time of the murder, he was in a different town, which was 490 kilometers away. After the victim's sister discovered her body and called the police, she also told her relatives about the incident. Michelle's mother called Jason's parents, who were on his way from Clintwood. He decided to visit his parents before he went home, and they told him about what had happened. Jason was shocked by the news and immediately moved to Raleigh with other relatives. During this trip, a friend called the man and told him that the policeman asked a lot of questions about him. Then Jason made a very strange decision. He said he wasn't going to talk to the police and he wanted to hire a lawyer. This only reinforced the investigators' suspicion, but with it, they have a new lead. Shelley, who was visiting the victim the day before the murder, told the police something interesting. Michelle told her that lately she felt like someone was watching her all the time. Shelley herself thought that someone was watching them through the window that night, and the woman even asked her friend to walk her to the car because she was a little afraid to leave the house alone. The detectives tried to find any evidence of possible surveillance, but continued to investigate Jason's potential involvement. The man left the house in his car on 2 November in the afternoon. Given that Clintwood was about 6 hours away, Jason had previously decided to stay overnight at the Hampton Hotel, which is roughly in the middle of the route. Detectives pulled security footage from this hotel and actually saw Jason check in at 10:54 p.m. 2 minutes later, he used his key card to enter the room, and that card has not been used since. The next morning, at about 7:40, he called his mother. The signal passed through a cell tower near Whiteley. This town was just on the way from the hotel to Clintwood, where his business meeting was to take place. The policeman also found out that the meeting was to take place at 10 a.m., but the man arrived 30 minutes later. When Jason arrived home with his relatives, the police seized his white Ford Explorer. Crew Sue couldn't find any trace of blood or other evidence in it. They also checked the hotel room where the man was staying, but nothing was found there either. The same applied to all of Jason's clothes and his belongings. It is noteworthy that he had in his car boots of 12 sizes and the same brand, which were found in the house, except it was a model with a completely different pattern on the sole. Through a court order, the man's DNA was taken, and it didn't match the 2 hairs found on the victim's body. He was also fingerprinted, although it didn't make much sense. Of course, they were everywhere in his house. The experts were only able to establish that none of the prints found contained any traces of blood, so the police couldn't find any clues that could link Jason to the murder. He himself did not talk to the police and used the services of a lawyer. Another fact indirectly supported his innocence. When they searched Jason's car, the police found a check from the hotel and a newspaper. Hampton employee said he slipped them under his room door somewhere between 3 and 5 in the morning. This meant that the man was definitely at the hotel that morning. In the end, it turned out to be quite a difficult situation. The only way Jason could have killed his wife was if he left the hotel in the middle of the night without anyone noticing, drove 270 kilometers to his house, committed the crime, cleaned his daughter of blood, then drove 200 miles backwards and entered his hotel room unnoticed, so the electronic map doesn't record it. The detectives tried to find out if it was possible in principle. They interviewed the hotel employees, and there they were waiting for an interesting clue. Early in the morning of 3 November, one of their staff noticed that the fire door on the first floor had been opened. From closing it, a small red stone was kept. The employee was surprised as this door always closed from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. He pulled a rock from under her and closed the door. After that, the man decided to check the security cameras and saw that one of them did not work. The one in the stairwell next to the door. The employee approached her and realized that someone had disconnected the wire from the camera. He asked a colleague to put the wire back in place, and at about 5:50 in the morning, the camera went back on. According to the surveillance tapes, the camera was turned off at 11:19 p.m. Then something interesting happened at 6:35 a.m. Less than an hour after the camera was re-hooked up, it was suddenly pointed at the ceiling. Given that there was no automatic mechanism to change positions, only one option remained. Someone manually turned her so she wouldn't look down the hall. Hotel management said the camera had never been turned off before, and the only time anyone turned it towards the ceiling was years ago. Then one of the guests wanted to sneak out of the hotel. For the detectives, it was a strong argument that Jason could still have left the hotel and driven to his home and then come back. The idea of a door and camera was obvious, and the fire doors in the hotel were designed so that they could only be opened from the inside. Jason could have used this door to avoid entering the hotel through the main entrance, as it would have been seen by staff and other cameras. Investigators canvassed all of Michelle's neighbors, and they were looking for some interesting leads. On the night of the murder, around 4:00 in the morning, a woman was distributing fresh newspapers around their neighborhood. Outside Michelle's house, she noticed a light SUV but could not remember his model. Neighbor was on her way to work around 5:20 this morning and also spotted a white SUV outside Jason and Michelle's house. As she drove past, she saw a man driving but could not see him. But more importantly, there was a woman in the passenger seat next to him. The neighbor thought she was trying to hide her face from her. A third witness drove past their house around 6:15 and saw a white SUV there too, but there was no one inside. The detectives believed that this car belonged to Jason. It was an absolute surprise to them that there was a woman in the car with him. Attempts to identify her were unsuccessful. However, in the process, investigators discovered that a man had been cheating on his wife with her girlfriend since college. The woman lived in Florida, and Jason regularly visited her as a business traveler. The detectives also discovered that, the day before Michelle's murder, the lovers had called about 50 times, but the content of their conversations was unknown. Despite all this, the police still had no evidence to link Jason to the murder. He himself still refused to talk to the police without his lawyer. But even in the presence of a lawyer, the man did not answer their questions. The detectives continued to work intensively on the case, and the investigation eventually dragged on for months. They were almost certain that it was Jason who had committed the murder. However, without hard evidence, they were in no hurry to arrest him. This occurred only on 14 December 2009, 3 years after the assassination. The investigators realized that they would not be able to find any new evidence, so they gathered all available material and charged him with murder. The trial began 2 years later, in June 2011. The prosecution insisted that Jason had planned to kill his wife beforehand because he did not want to lose some of his property in the divorce. According to their version, he initially decided to stay in this hotel as this would allow him to return home to commit murder and drive back. Jason's ex-girlfriends also appeared at the trial. One of them said that he proposed to her and gave her a ring, but later, during an argument, he grabbed a woman's arm and ripped it off her finger. Given that the killer removed the rings from Michelle's hand, this testimony seemed relevant to the prosecution. Another woman turned out to be Jason's second mistress and Michelle's girlfriend. The woman said she was spending time with a man at his house when Michelle was away somewhere. She was also married, and on one of those nights, Jason took off her wedding ring. He did not return it until the next day, which seemed strange to the woman. Michelle's other mistress, a college friend, also appeared in court. She admitted that they were having an affair, but it was much more interesting to have their correspondence printed out. Just a few days before the murder, I wrote her this. I don't know how it happened, but I know how it ends. 2 broken hearts. But I don't care. I'm going to suffer a lot, but you're worth it, even for a moment. Given that Michelle was killed just a few days after the communication, its contents turned out to be quite disturbing. But one of the key witnesses was a woman who worked at a gas station between Raleigh and the town where Jason's hotel was located. She said that at about 5:20 in the morning, a man pulled up in a white SUV and stopped at the furthest pump. He tried to refuel the car, but by law at night, people had to pay for gas or show their ID. The driver walked into a gas station and yelled at the employee, after which he threw $20 into the car for $15 and left without taking the change. The woman claimed to have identified the man from the photo. Jason Young was the witness. The witness changed the case. I mean, he was the one who found out that Jason was between his house and the hotel early this morning. This once again pointed to the fact that he could have killed his wife. Michelle's sister Meredith also appeared at the trial. After the murder, Cassidy lived with her father, who moved in with his parents. For a long time, relatives on the mother's side had been trying to get a court decision that would allow them to temporarily take their daughter home. This went on for several years, and the lawyers were close to a positive decision, and at that moment, Jason simply handed over full custody of Meredith's daughter, effectively abandoning her. As a result, the girl moved in with her mother's relatives, who have since raised her without her father's involvement. At the trial, Jason himself spoke for the first time. He stated that he did not kill his wife and told his side of the story. The man admitted that their marriage was falling apart, but insisted that they would divorce sooner or later, and he had no reason to kill her. His lawyers insisted that there was no evidence against Jason. They also tried to convince everyone that men could not physically travel that distance, kill their wife, and return to the hotel early in the morning. As an argument, they tried to calculate the average fuel consumption of his car and compare it with the data on how often a man filled with gasoline. According to lawyers, he would not have had enough fuel to travel all this distance. However, it was probably not possible to check this version. However, the jury was never able to reach a consensus. As a result, the judge was forced to declare the trial bankrupt and appointed a new trial, which was to take place 1 year later. Something else happened in the background. Michelle's family was convinced that it was Jason who killed her, so they decided to file a civil suit against him. Unlike a criminal court, the required level of evidence for such claims is low. The judge may not, however, sentence a person to any form of imprisonment. Jason completely ignored the lawsuit and decided not to participate in the trial, which played against him. After examining all the evidence, the judge concluded that he had killed his wife, and Jason was ordered to pay $15 million to the relatives of the deceased. The retrial, which began in 2012, allowed the prosecution to use the civil action decision as an argument for the defendant's guilt. Besides, they figured out something else during the prep. It turns out that over the years, Jason had purchased shoes with the same pattern, the bloody print of which was left in Michelle's room. They never found the shoes. These additional factors only reinforced the case against Jason, and this time the jury found him guilty of murder. The man was sentenced to life without parole. His lawyers had tried to challenge the decision, and they were still appealing, but all of them had been rejected. The case was widely reported in the media, and its finale provoked heated debate. On the one hand, in all these years, they haven't been able to find any physical evidence linking Jason to the murder. On the other hand, a vast array of circumstantial evidence indicated that the man had set up an almost perfect cover. If he hadn't stopped at the gas station that morning and made a scene with the cashier, she might not have remembered his face, in which case this case could still be unsolved. As for the woman the neighbor saw in the passenger seat of his car that night, it's all very ambiguous. There is no other evidence to suggest that other people were involved in this crime. The foreign hair and DNA in the house did not guarantee this. They could have been left by one of the guests long before the murder. However, the prosecution did not rule out 100% that someone might have helped Jason, but this remains a mystery. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and be sure to like it if you liked it. I also recommend subscribing to my channel, where I publish daily the most interesting criminal news from around the world. Thank you for watching,